The tale of a youth who was set out to learn what fear is. A father had 2 sons, of whom the eldest was clever and bright, and always knew what he was about. But the youngest was stupid, and couldn't learn or understand anything. So much so that those who saw him exclaimed, "What a burden he'll be to his father!" Now, when there was anything to be done, the eldest had always to do it. But if something was required later, or in the night time, and the way led through the courtyard or such ghostly place, he always replied, "Oh no, father, nothing will induce me to go there. It makes me shudder." For he was afraid. Or when they sat in an evening around the fire telling stories which made one's flesh creep, the listeners sometimes said, "Oh, it makes one shudder." The youngest sat in the corner, heard the exclamation, and could not understand what it meant. "They're always saying it makes one shudder. It makes one shudder. Nothing makes me shudder. It's probably an art quite beyond me." Now it happened that his father said to him one day, "Hearken you there in the corner. You are growing big and strong, and you must learn to earn your own bread. Look at your brother. What pains he takes. But all the money I've spent on your education is thrown away." "My dear father," he replied, "I will gladly learn. In fact, if it were possible, I should like to learn to shudder. I don't understand that bit yet." The oldest laughed when he heard this and thought to himself, "Good heavens, what a ninny my brother is. He'll never come to any good. As bent as a twig. His tree is so inclined." The father sighed and answered him, "You'll soon learn to shudder, but that won't help you make a living." Shortly after this, when the sexton came to pay them a visit, the father broke out to him and told him what a bad hand his youngest son was at everything. He knew nothing and learnt nothing. Only think, when I asked him how he proposed gaining a livelihood, he actually asked to be taught to shudder. "If that's all he wants," said the sexton, "I can teach him just that. Just you send him to me, I'll soon polish him up." The father was quite pleased at the proposal, because he thought it would be good discipline for the youth. And so the sexton took him into his house, and his duty was to toll the bell. After a few days he woke him at midnight, bade him rise and climb to the tower and toll. "Now, my friend, I will teach you to shudder," he thought. He stole forth secretly in front, and when the youth was up above, and had turned around to grasp the bell rope, he saw, standing opposite the hole of the belfry, a white figure. "Who's there?" he called out, but the figure gave no answer, and neither stirred nor moved. "Answer!" cried the youth, "or be gone. You have no business here at this hour of the night." But the sexton remained motionless, so that the youth might think it was a ghost. The youth called out a second time, "What do you want here? Speak if you are an honest fellow, or I'll knock you down the stairs." The sexton thought, "He can't mean that in earnest," so gave forth no sound, and stood as though he were made of stone. Then the youth shouted at him a third time, and as that too had no effect, he made a dash at the spectre and knocked it down the stairs, so that it fell about 10 steps and remained lying in a corner. Thereupon he tolled the bell and went to bed without saying a word and fell asleep. The sexton's wife waited a long time for her husband, but he never appeared. At last she became anxious and woke the youth and asked, "Do you know where my husband went? He went up to the tower in front of you." "No," answered the youth, "but someone stood on the stairs up there just opposite of the trap door to the belfry, and because he wouldn't answer me or go away, I took him in for a rogue and knocked him down. You'd better go see if it was he. I should be such distress if it were." The wife ran and found her husband, who was lying groaning at the corner with his leg broken. She carried him down, then hurried with loud protestations to the youth's father. "Your son has been the cause of petty misfortune," she cried. "He threw my husband downstairs so that he broke a leg, and take a good-for-nothing wretch out of your house." The father was horrified, and hurried to the youth, and gave him a scolding. "What unholy pranks are these? The evil one must have put them into your head." "Father," he replied, "only listen to me. I am quite guiltless. He stood there in the night like one who meant harm. I didn't know who he was, and warned him 3 times to be gone." "Oh," groaned the father, "you'll bring me nothing but misfortune. Get out of my sight. I won't have anything more to do with you." "Yes, father, willingly. Only wait till daylight, then I'll set out and learn to shudder. And in that way I shall master the art which will gain me a living." "Learn what you will," said the father. "It's all one to me. Here are $50 for you, and set forth a wide world with them. But see and tell no one where you come from or who your father is, for I am ashamed of you." "Yes, father, whatever you wish, and if that's all you ask, I can easily keep it in mind." When day broke, the youth put the $50 in his pocket and set out on the high, hard road. He kept muttering to himself, "If only I could shudder, if only I could shudder." Just at this moment, a man who came by heard the youth speaking to himself. And when they had gone on a bit, and were sight of the gallows, the man said to him, "Look, there is a tree where 7 people are to be hanged, and are now learning to fly. Sit down under it, and wait till nightfall, and then you'll pretty soon learn to shudder." "If that's all I have to do," answered the youth, "it's easily done. But if I learn to shudder so quickly, then you shall have my $50. Just come back to me tomorrow morning early." Then the youth went to the gallows tree, and sat down underneath it, and waited for the evening. Because he felt cold, he lit himself a fire. But at midnight it got so chill that in spite of the fire he couldn't keep warm. And as the wind blew the corpses one against each other, tossing them to and fro, he thought to himself, "If you are perishing down here by the fire, those poor wretches up there must be shaking and shivering." And because he had a tender heart, he put up a ladder, which he climbed and hooked the bodies one after another and took them down, all 7. Then he stirred the fire and blew it up, and placed them all around in a circle, that they might warm themselves. But they sat there and did not move, and caught fire against their clothes. Then he spoke, "Take care, or I'll hang you up again." But the dead men did not hear, and let their rags go on burning. Then he got angry and said, "If you aren't careful yourselves, then I can't help you, and I don't mean to burn you with you." Then he hung them up again in a row. Then he sat back down by his fire and fell asleep. On the following morning, the man came to him and wished to get his $50, and said, "Now you know what it is to shudder?" "No," he answered. "How should I? Those fellows up there never opened their mouths, and were so stupid that they let their old tatters they have on let their bodies burn." Then the old man saw he wouldn't get his $50 that day, and went off saying, "Well, I'm blessed to ever meet such a person in my life before." The youth went too on his way, and began to murmur to himself, "Oh, if only I could shudder! If I could only shudder!" A carrier who was walking behind him heard those words, and asked him, "Who are you?" "I don't know," said the youth. "Where do you hail from?" "I don't know." "Who's your father?" "I mayn't say." "What are you constantly muttering to yourself?" "Oh," said the youth, "I would give words to shudder, but no one can teach me." "Stuff and nonsense," said the carrier. "Come along with me, and I'll soon put that right." The youth went with the carrier, and in the evening they reached an inn, where they were to spend the night. Then, just as they were entering the room, he said again, quite aloud, "Oh, if only I could shudder! If I could only shudder!" The landlord, who heard this, laughed and said, "If that's what you're sighing for, you shall be given every opportunity here." "Oh, hold your tongue," said the landlord's wife. "So many people have paid for their curiosity with their lives. If it were 1,000 pities of those beautiful eyes were never again to behold daylight. But the youth said, No matter how difficult, I insist on learning it. Why, that's what I've set out to do. He left the landlord no peace till he told him that in the neighborhood stood a haunted castle, where one could easily learn to shudder, if one only kept watch on it for 3 nights. The king had promised the man who dared to do this thing his daughter for a wife, and she was the most beautiful maiden under the sun. There was also much treasure hidden in the castle, guarded by evil spirits, which would then be free, and was sufficient to make a poor man more than rich. Many had already gone in, but so far none had ever come out. So the youth went to the king and spoke. If I were allowed, I should much like to watch for 3 nights in the castle. The king looked at him, and because he pleased him, he said, You can ask for 3 nights, none of them living, and those you may take with you into the castle. Then he answered, Well, I shall beg for a fire, a turning lathe, and a carving bench with a knife attached. On the following day the king had everything put into the castle, and when night drew, the youth took up his position there. He lit a bright fire in one of the rooms, placed the carving bench with a knife close to it, and set himself down on the turning lathe. Oh, if I could only shudder, he said. But I shan't learn it here either. Toward midnight, he wanted to make up the fire, and as he was blowing up a blaze, he heard a shriek from the corner. Oh, Mia, how cold we are! You fools, he cried. Why do you scream? If you are cold, come and sit by the fire and warm yourselves. And as he spoke, 2 huge black cats sprang fiercely forward and sat down, one on each side of him, and gazed wildly at him with their fiery eyes. After a time, when they had warmed themselves, they said, Friend, shall we play a little game of cards? Why not, he replied, but let me see your paws. Then they outstretched their claws. Ha, he said, what long nails you've got. Wait a minute, I must cut them first. Thereupon he seized them by the scruff of their necks, lifted them up on the carving bench, and screwed down their paws firmly. After watching you narrowly, he said, I no longer feel the desire to play cards with you. And with the words he struck them dead and threw them out into the water. But when he had thus sent the 2 of them to their final rest, and was again about to sit down at the fire, out of every nook and corner came forth black cats and black dogs, with fiery chains in such swarms that he couldn't possibly get away from them. They yelled at the most ghastly manner, jumped upon his fire, scattered it all, and tried to put it out. He looked on quietly for a time, but when it got beyond a joke, he seized his carving knife and called out, Be off with you rabble-rout! Then led at them. Some of them fled away, the others he struck dead and threw them into the pond below. When he returned, he blew up the sparks of the fire once more and warmed himself. And as he sat, thus his eyes refused to keep open any longer, and the desire to sleep stole over him. Then he looked around him, and beheld in the corner a large bed. The very thing, said he, and lay down on it. When he wished to close his eyes, the bed began to move by itself, and ran all around the castle. Capital, he said, only a little quicker. Then the bed sped on as if drawn by 6 horses, over thresholds and stairs, up this way and down that. All of a sudden, crash, crash! With a bound it turned over, upside down, and lay like a mountain on top of him. But he tossed the blankets and pillows in the air, and emerged from underneath, and said, Now anyone who has a fancy for it may go for a drive. Lay down by his fire, and slept till daylight. In the morning the king came, and when he beheld him lying on the ground, he imagined the ghosts had been too much for him, and that he was dead. Then he said, What a pity, and such a fine fellow he was. And the youth heard this and got up and said, "It's not come to that yet." Then the king was astonished, but very glad, and asked how it was he fared with him. "Oh, first rate," he replied. "And now I've survived the first night, I shall go through the other two also." The landlord, when he went to him, opened his eyes and said, "Well, I never thought to see you alive. Have you learned what it is shuddering?" "No," he replied. "It's quite hopeless. If someone could only tell me how to." The second night he went up to the old castle. He sat down by the fire and began his old refrain. "If only I could shudder." As midnight approached, a noise and din broke out, at first gentle, but gradually increasing. Then all was quiet for a minute, and at length was a loud scream. Half a man dropped down the chimney and fell before him. "Hi up there," shouted he. "There's another half wanted down here. There's not enough." And then the din commenced once more, and there was a shrieking and yelling, and then the other half fell down. "Wait a bit, I'll stir up the fire for you." When he had done this, and again looked around, the two pieces had united, and a horrible-looking man on his seat. "Come," said the youth, "I didn't bargain for that. The seat is mine." The man tried to shove him away, but the youth wouldn't allow it for a moment, and, pushing him off by force, sat down in his place again. Then more men dropped down, one after the other, who, fetching 9 skeleton legs and 2 skulls, put them up and played 9pence with them. The youth thought he would like to play the game too, and said, "Look here, do you mind my joining the game?" "No, not if you have money." "I've money enough," he said, "but your balls aren't very round." Then he took the skulls and placed them on the lathe, and he turned them until they were round. "Now they'll roll along better," he said, and "Whoopla! Now the fun begins." They played with them and lost some of his money, but when 12 struck, everything vanished before his eyes. He lay down and slept peacefully. The next morning the king came, anxious for news. "How have you got on this time?" he asked. "I played 9pence," he answered, "and lost a few pence." "Did you shudder then?" "No such luck. I did make myself merry. Oh, if I only knew what it was to shudder." On the third night he sat down again on his bench and said in the most desponding way, "If only I could shudder!" When it got late, 6 big men came in carrying a coffin. Then he cried, "Ha ha! That's most likely my little cousin who only died a few nights ago." And, beckoning on his finger, he called out, "Come, my small cousin, come!" They placed the coffin on the ground, and he approached it and took off the cover. In it lay a dead man. He felt his face, and it was cold as ice. "Wait," he said, "I'll heat you up a bit." He went to the fire and warmed his hand, and then laid it on the man's face. But the cold death remained. Then he lifted him out and set him down by the fire, and laid him on his knee, and rubbed his arms so that the blood might circulate again. When that too had no effect, it occurred to him that if 2 people lay together in bed, they warmed each other. So he put him into the bed and covered him up, then lay down beside him. After a while the corpse became warm, and began to move. Then the youth said, "Now, my little cousin, what would have happened if I hadn't warmed you?" But the dead man rose up and cried out, "Now I will strangle you." "What?" he said. "Is that the thanks I get? You should put the coffin back. I should put you straight back in the coffin." They lifted him up and threw him in and closed the lid. Then the 6 men came and carried him out again. "I simply can't shudder," he said, "and it's clear I shan't learn it in a lifetime here." Then a man entered, of more than ordinary size, and of a very fearful appearance, but he was old and had a white beard. "Oh, you miserable creature! Now you will know what it is to shudder," he cried, "for you must die." "Not so quickly," answered the youth. If I am to die, you must catch me first." "I shall soon lay hold of you," spoke the monster. "Gently, gently. Don't boast too much. I'm as strong as you, and stronger too." "We'll soon see," said the old man. "If you're stronger than I, I'll let you off. Come, let's have a try." Then he led him through the dark passages to a forge, and grasping an axe, he drove one of the anvils into a blow into the earth. "I can do better than that," cried the youth, and went to the other anvil. The old man drew near him in order to watch closely, and his white beard hung right down. The youth seized the axe, and cleft the anvil open, and jammed in the old man's beard. "Now I have you," he said. "Now it's your turn to die." Then he seized an iron rod, and belabored the man until he, whimpering, begged him to leave off, and he would give him great riches. The youth drew out the axe, and let him go. The old man led him down the castle and showed him the cellar with 3 chests of gold. "One of these," said he, "belongs to a poor, one to the king, the other is yours." At that moment, 12 struck, and the spirit vanished, leaving the youth alone in the dark. "I'll surely be able to find the way out," he said, and groped about. He at length found his way back to the room, and he slept by the fire. The next morning the king came and said, "Well, now you've surely learned to shudder." "No," he answered. "What can it be? My dead cousin was here, and an old bearded man came. He showed me heaps of money down below there, but what shuddering is no one has told me." Then the king spoke. "You have freed the castle from its curse, and you shall marry my daughter." "That's all charming," he said, "but I still don't know what it is to shudder." Then the gold was brought up, and the wedding was celebrated. But the young king, though he loved his wife dearly, and thought he was very happy, still kept on saying, "If I could only shudder, if I could only shudder." At last he reduced her to despair. Then her maid said, "I'll help you. We'll soon make him shudder." So she went out to the stream that flowed through the garden, and a pailful of little gudgeons brought to her. At night, when the king was asleep, his wife had to pull the clothes off him, pour the pail full of fresh gudgeons over him, so that the little fish swam all about him. When he awoke, he cried out, "Oh, how I shudder, how I shudder! Dear wife, I know what shuddering is."